We change now to the lecture that I called The Eclipse of Gender and Reason. Yes, and as you already mentioned, I want to discuss basic points of my aim to model a feminist critique of epistemology on the ground of critical theory of Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. As you said, I'm currently at the beginning of my PhD at University of Vienna on this topic, and I plan to work on it further the next 2 years. So my goal is, for today, to compactly show points of contact where the critique of epistemology of the founders of the Frankfurt School meets with the materialist feminist project. So, the next 20 minutes will be structured in 5 parts. First, I want to start with an introduction and the question, why am I doing this research? And given the fact that I'm not sure how many of you work on epistemologies, I just shortly want to give an overview about the relation of my thoughts to the present discussions in epistemology, in feminist epistemology. Then, like the title of this conference suggests, I will then start building bridges to critical theory by, third point, by outlining the double term of subject in Frankfurt School, the term of the epistemic subject and the individual. And fourth, in consequence, I will continue with my thoughts on the double term of gender in the critical theory, and I want to present to you my actual biggest questions that I have for my further work. And in the conclusion, I will shortly argue why I think that critical theory is a good base for a feminist epistemology. Yeah. So let's start with first. I started to work on epistemologies after years of analyzing sex, gender, society, and capitalism, and I still wonder about the straight historic continuity of gender binarity and hierarchy, whereas at the same time societies changed fundamentally. To sharpen my thought, times they are changing, but sex and gender, they keep adapting. And since in the dialectics of enlightenment, the authors develop a profound critique of the European concepts of rationality and reason and show how deep the roots of capitalism reach in Europe's history and rationality, I also wanted to read more about the link between gender binarity and reason in critical theory, but without success, because hardly anybody is working on this topic. And the only exception I know about is the dissertation of Elmer Fletchert, whom you know from the panel before, which I recommend all of you who have further interest in this topic. Yes, still there are feminists working on epistemology with other theories, since at least the second wave of women's movement. And orientated on the dictionary of epistemology, I just want to shortly stream them, show you 8 streams where you can see what, you could classify them. So first you have mitigated relativist theories. They criticized positivism and stated that knowledge never is value-free, neither objective nor anonymous. You have the contextual empirism. They show the socio-economic and political situation of the epistemic subject. They show the relevance of it, and the context in the exploration is very important to this theory. You have probably the best known theory in these epistemologies, the feminist standpoint theories. They have their critique is parallel to Georg Lukács' theory of the subject-object of the proletariat, and they claim that the feminist standpoint is also a privileged standpoint. You have theories of situated knowledge. Best known is probably Donna Haraway. You have feminist constructivism, which is related to these theories of situated knowledge. You have epistemologies of ignorance, agential realism, and materialism feminisms. So, just a short overview. What I wanted to point out is what all of these theories, in my view, have in common is that they have ideology-critical interest, and they focus on the relation between epistemic argumentation and political or moral argumentation in science theories. And they also always point out the relevance for the epistemology of the social context, the status, and the sexualized bodies of the knowers. Yeah, so next step, building bridges to critical theory. I would say what they also have in common is a lot of goals they share with critical theory. So, critical theory, referring to Adorno and Horkheimer, as well as feminist epistemologies and theories, criticize the putative, neutral, anonymous, and value-free knowledge. Both reflect in an ideology-critical sense the deep connection between society, power, and knowledge, and both point out the relevance of the oppression of the individual and oppression in society for knowledge. But, as I would state, critical theory, as dialectical theory, does it in a completely different way. I would outline that in critical theory, there is still a concept of truth, of course, which is always dialectically related to, which is always historic and refers to specific constellations, despite of most of the mentioned theories. Second, there is still a concept of objective reason and universalism, that both interfere dialectically with the subjective reason and particularism. And third, as I would say, it offers a non-constructivist, non-relativist, and non-realist alternative to the mentioned traditions, which is open for materialist feminist thought. So, third, let me explain to you more precisely where I think the connection points to materialist feminists could be. To show the connection points, I would start with the terms subject or subject in critical theory. And there I would start with the dialectics of enlightenment, as well as with the text on subject and object from Adorno. And there Adorno and Horkheimer use the term subject first in the idealist sense of Hegel. They first start with the epistemic subject. But they criticize this start also. So in the idealist theory, it's the epistemic subject itself that constitutes the objects, as the late Hegel stated, and as Adorno points out in his critique. So Adorno and Horkheimer reject this thought, because consequently this would mean when you have a subject constituting the objects, everything would be subject. So also being would become something that would be prior to the objects, or every concrete thing would then be deduced from the general, from the totality, and being would become a closed logic. And everything that exists would become a result of the intellect. So logic would become a theory of creation, just like religion. And the subject would be just as mighty as God. So for Adorno and Horkheimer, this is not only this elevation of the subject, die Erhöhung des Subjekts, this elevation of the subject is not only false, but is also directly connected with tyranny and power. Just as the elevated subject is dominating over the objects, also human beings dominate over nature, over their internal nature, as well as over the external nature and other human beings. So their critique of consciousness is always a critique of society. So, even when Adorno and Horkheimer tie their thoughts to Hegel, they reject the elevation of the subject. Further, Adorno shows on subject and object that every subject is an object itself, but not the other way around. In other words, he shows that one can't ever dismiss the single human being, the individual, and therefore the society, from the epistemic subject. Jan Weyand calls this equivocation in Adorno's term of subject. It always means both the epistemic subject and the individual. And in the subject itself, both sides are related. So, therefore, the term subject is always the mediation of epistemology and the real world. So Adorno puts the Hegel term of subject from the head to the feet and defines the object as preferential. So, subject doesn't constitute the world, it's a product of the world itself. This is also, let's say, the materialist clue of Adorno's critique of epistemology. And I would say that this is also the point where feminist epistemologies could work on it further. So this is also confirmed by some of the key thoughts of the dialectics of enlightenment, where Adorno and Horkheimer show how knowledge and reason become co-workers of bondage, of authority and anti-enlightenment because of the interrelation of subject-object relations and the process of self-preservation. In their view, the origin of this dialectical process of the modern or European reason is the alienation of human beings from nature. They show the more human beings free themselves from nature, the more they become unfree. But the alienation of nature is at the same time the process of the constitution of the subject as well as of reason, and as they say at the same time, it constitutes the male gender role and the female gender role. So epistemology in this sense means the critique of the constitution of the subject, as well as the critique of society and power, as well as a critique of epistemology. So, the critique of epistemology is therefore a critique of the rule of the abstract thought. Maybe you think about what Frigga Haugs mentioned earlier this day, where she said that the abstract thought is something that feminists should relate to. This would be something I would say that Adorno would reject. A critique of the general, so this critique of epistemology would also mean the critique of the general against the concrete, a critique of the rule of human beings against the nature, and a critique of the rule of man against women. So they show how reason changes from a tool for liberation to a tool for the ruling power. And this is also precisely the thought that Horkheimer develops in his work Eclipse of Reason, and the basis for Adorno's thoughts in the negative dialectics. And I think that both these works could be like a method or a guiding line for thoughts that have to be thought for a project of a critique of the eclipse of a gendered reason. Yeah, so what I would say, what are the connection points for a feminist critique of epistemology? As I tried to show, the critical theory after Adorno and Horkheimer implies a double term of subject. First, the oppressed and oppressing subject in the real world, and the epistemic subject in the sphere of the oppressed or instrumentalized reason. And I think that parallel to this thought, and in consequence, it also implies a doubled term of gender. The oppressed and oppressing sexualized subject in the real world, and the epistemic sexualized subject in the sphere of the sexualized, oppressed, and instrumentalized reason. And so my hypothesis is that both spheres of the sides of the subject are autonomously, dialectically mediated. Yeah, so I think that a feminist critique of epistemology in terms of critical theory should be a critique of the eclipse of gendered reason, which implies always a critique of society as well as of ideology. But one should be aware that the critique of sexism has not only its equivalent in the ideology critique by the question, where does the ideology legitimate the oppression of women, but also have to be aware that the structure of the gendered reason itself prevents an easy answer, and as well structures thoughts and prevents a free world in general. So, what could be the specifics of this gendered reason in terms of critical theory? This is still my main question, and I'm dealing with currently in my work for my dissertation. And so I'm afraid I can't already deliver you a definite answer, but maybe 2 points on this question. One of the most meaningful notes of Adorno on this question can be found in his text on the relation of sociology and psychology, where he states, and now there is a quote, and it was hard to translate it, so I read it in English and German. So there he writes, "Humanity forms itself as sense for difference in their most powerful experience, the difference of gender." In German this would mean, das Humane bildet sich als Sinn für die Differenz überhaupt an deren mächtigster Erfahrung, der von den Geschlechtern. Yeah, I'm not yet sure whether I want to win this track or not. Let's see, but it's a note that maybe you could think on it further. Second, I think the other very meaningful understanding probably is the parallelism of the alienation of people from nature, the critique of society-nature relations, which at the same time is the process of the constitution of the subject as well as of reason, and Adorno and Horkheimer state at the same time the process that constitutes the female and male gender role and the oppression of women. But as I've said, I'm not yet sure where I want to get my thoughts further and where my next steps will guide me through, so I'm pretty glad that I could present my thoughts to you today and maybe give some hints or anything for me. Yes, I'm already at the conclusion. I hope I could show that the very rich theories of critical theory deliver various connection points for feminist materialist epistemologies. And as the most meaningful points for this thesis, I want to recap the following: their ideology critical basis, I would say also the double term of subject, which implies, in my view, the double term of gender, and the dialectical critique of enlightenment and reason. Yeah, and on this basis, I will continue my work on my dissertation with the title Gretel schreibt es auf, zur Kritik der vergeschlechtlichten Vernunft. Yeah, and I'm very glad for all of your feedback. Thank you.